In September 2008, the Urban Land Institute held its annual placemaking conference in Denver. As part of the program, participants took field trips. One of those trips was to City Center Englewood, the region's first transit-oriented development and former site of Cinderella City Shopping Mall. They divided into 4 groups and toured the site, considering transportation, development and programming, design, and retail. They then used their collective brainpower to come up with ideas to enhance each area. Here are the summaries presented by the group leaders.
We really focused on one core concept in terms of what should the City of Englewood do next, and that is fix your front doors. And we identified really 2 key front doors that are the gateways into the project. The first, obviously, is the light rail platform. The second gateway we saw was right here. If you think about the way people arrive at this project, they're going to arrive by rail or they're going to arrive by car. And if you look at those two gateways, neither one really responds or draws people into the project. There's a third gateway that potentially happens here, but we thought that the distance out to Broadway, having to bridge 3 essentially surface parked, power center type developments was too far for that to make it a credible entrance. So starting with the transit platform, the couple of the key problems we saw were, A, people who are going to their cars never have to leave the transit platform. So if there is a demand for additional transit parking, instead of expanding this parking field and expanding that parking field, is there an opportunity to put transit parking here so that people who park here have to move through the development to get to the station? The second is coming into this space was really foreboding. There is a blank wall here. The way the retail is designed here really needs some improvement. So we saw an opportunity to recreate that facade, potentially create a retail space in the corner here, or even to expand this building to help enclose this space. And if it's not retail, maybe it's some other use that begins to activate the plaza. Combine that with a better sense of programming of the public space, whether the City of Englewood takes a larger role in terms of how they activate that public space. If you think about the design of the retail here, is really poorly designed throughout in terms of it being of a generic quality. The neutral piers are too wide, so there's a lot of work that can be done just in activating the retail storefront. The second, which may not seem as obvious, is if this is in essence the really what I think is the primary gateway, because most people are going to come here by their car, having a big box that turns itself back to the middle and a blank wall on the corner with really no identity here at the intersection is really a lost opportunity. We came out here to this corner and we looked down and you can see the fountain squarely in your viewpoint. And one of the suggestions or one of the words that came out of that was create a boulevard here. And that seems like the right concept. And then can that boulevard extend across to the south side of Hamden, whether it be through the same kit of parts that creates an entrance here, landscaping, graphic elements, something that happens on the ground plane to begin to create this as an identity. And then to develop the streets here. And what we heard on our walkthrough was that the residential seems to be doing rather well. Could this street be designed with residential above retail and create a retail section here that vastly improves upon the retail section and the flaws that were created here in terms of the differences in grade, the width of the street, the character of the place. So while this retail probably will continue to struggle just because of the way it's been built, if we can create a substitute for that that really connects the public into and through this area, you essentially have enough retail, we think, to create an entertainment-oriented retail component. It's never going to be a lifestyle shopping center, but having a having the library here, having the Civic Center there, you've already got a Bally's, having all of that work together to create a place for people to come, hang out, enjoy, couple that with some public programming in here, and fix some of the ground plane architecture seems like the next steps that we would take.
When we thought about traffic, transportation, circulation, access, it was really, in a holistic sense, making the whole development work better rather than just looking at traffic efficiency, if you will. In fact, some of what we're suggesting might lengthen travel times, particularly for commuter who park in the current parking facilities. In terms of what's working well, we can't lose sight of the fact that this was a retrofit development, not a greenfield, and a magnificent achievement just in terms of implementing Colorado's first transit-oriented development. I think there's a lot of congratulations that should go around for that. The grid system generally works. You had pre-existing east-west on the boundaries of the site. The idea of Edgewood parking, Englewood parking, going east-west certainly is a good idea, could use some improvement. The north-south streets, while they're not perfect, provide general circulation, connection, and connectivity into the surrounding communities. So I think the grid does work overall. And that one segment of Englewood Parkway between the Piazza and Galapago, we thought was the better example of a street that works, although perhaps still could use some improvements, as we just heard from Don. In terms of what is not working as well, we noted pedestrian friendliness in a couple of locations, particularly the section of Englewood Parkway through what I'm going to call the Walmart parking area, which really felt like walking through a parking lot. And the pedestrian friendliness we pointed out on the south and east side of the piazza. There's no sidewalk on that west side of the piazza going north-south. And it just, in the orientation for pedestrians, it looked like you either went through a wet area or had to cross over on the east side. And then pedestrian crosswalks, the absence of pedestrian crosswalks. Actually, there may be some issues that the city needs to look into in terms of liability, because there are curb cuts in compliance with handicap requirements and so forth, but no crosswalks at those locations. Probably our major point was the idea that virtually all of the commuters coming from outside of this immediate area bypass the heart of this transit-oriented development. The question was, what could be done to change that? One thought was that north side commuter lot, which is the primary facility right now, is in a prime location. It seemed to us that residential densities are a little modest for this site, and that would be perhaps a prime location for major density. And RTD has a requirement that 50%, when it redevelops in an area such as this, 50% of its parking should be within 1,000 feet. Fortunately, we have north side and south side, and so we think you could stay within that criteria and then push the parking, although interesting point to have the parking immediately south of that segment. We didn't think of that. We were actually thinking of pushing it further east. Their guidelines call for anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 feet, and you could influence demand by charging for parking as demand builds up for the closer in spots, make it free. There's a shuttle service, a free bus shuttle that runs today. You could improve headways in the peaks to 5 minutes and then provide free parking. The primary redevelopment opportunity is the Walmart parking. Now, they have some degree of control over it, obviously, but I think we heard the point that flexibility was built in. If that area were to redevelop and that segment of Englewood Parkway, which is most wanting, is made into a parking lined on the edges with development, and then the parking, particularly on the south side, away from the Walmart, could be used for multiple purposes, then including commuter parking, shared parking uses, then you might have a great solution here, which adds density, adds people walking on the main spine to the transit station. The final point, and I'm going to ask my group to let me know if I missed anything here, is just the overall pedestrian and bicycle circulation is not really well developed, I think, and needs to be on this site. So we're talking not just about crosswalks, but ways of guiding pedestrians through the site as it develops.
Our scope was a little larger, looking at how you organize an urban district. First and foremost, we want to apply what we call the covered wagon strategy. You need to define where this district is and where it isn't. And in our mind, your downtown district goes from the tracks to Broadway, including the historic district. And what you now need to think of as separate neighborhoods within that district, each of which has a different marketing strategy, a different physical strategy, and a different story, if you would. You have one neighborhood started pretty effectively. You have another neighborhood started, which is South Broadway, which has a history and a past, something you can never replace. And so one of the ways you define a district is you mark its boundaries. Your brand needs to come out to every one of these intersections as you hit it, not unlike Denver Country Club, and say the land in here is more valuable inside than outside. That is our downtown district. There's clearly a historic neighborhood and new transit neighborhood. We're not sure whether the commercial neighborhood, we're calling it, is 2 or 1 or whatever. It'll have its own strategy. I think Dawn's ideas relative to not only branding the gateways, but how you bring that brand into Main Street were really effective and beyond what we thought of. Number 2, you must decide what your brand is. Your brand right now is called We Are Nothing. We're a hybrid. We're not this or we're not that. It's not we are this and we are that. That's what happens with hybrids. You get to be a crossover. We think your brand is green above all else. And help me, team, what was the other one? Green urban? Call it green urban. We think you have beginnings of the brand, but that is what needs to tie itself around. Colorado is hot, and other places that have settled on green, Boulder Mall, Broomfield, have been effective with the marketplace, but that is yet to be had in South Denver. It's out there. And Colorado-ish is out there to be had because right now Park Meadows is the only one that owns that. So we would tell you the following. This area here is not for retail. Forget about it. It's not going to work now. It's never going to work. You don't have enough people doing this. That is your civic center. Embrace that. Go down and get your community college and get them up here. Take your other civic assets and make a real civic center like cities have, like they've always had. Our recommendation is to put somebody in the first floor here that's out there, and you have a site right here. I know buses have to do stuff here. But you have a site that needs to enclose this space on this side with something someday. Your civic expansion area is right here around this center. This is your civic space. It's not that space and that space. So you need some redesign to get rid of 50% of the paving for sure. You need to increase the shade and shadows. Frankly, if you just take 50% of the sidewalk out and plant it in grass, you'll be fine. Doesn't even matter which 50%. Just get it more green. You have a consumer here called families. There is no family-friendly anything here. You need lovable objects. You need water you can touch. You need kids in your civic center. It'd be better yet if you even had a school here. So this needs to become family-friendly. The art's fantastic, but it's still elitist. So, have fun. Having said that, your brand, your place where you do things, events, etc., is not here. It's here. It's this street. You need to turn that street into the street festival thing. You got to get rid of the angled parking and put parallel parking there and reclaim that amount of public space for either restaurant seating, etc. And you need to brand that street. Change the character of the retail, maybe just the awnings, put lights across the street. That is your event street. We would highly recommend you engage ethnic neighborhoods and communities to make that their street. They need a home. Santa Fe's gone a long ways trying to service a certain community that's not being serviced. That street needs to be all food. It will not ever be retail. Your retail's out here. So you need to make a food street that you can do that's got a brand and it's wonderful and it's fun and it closes on Thursday nights and you have farmers markets on Saturday morning, etc. In the big twilight zone, we don't know how you bring the brand across there, but you got a good model here from a gateway to seeing your brand. So you just need to do that so that every time you look through those gates, you see something. It doesn't have to be a waterfall, but your brand, people need to know that brand's there. And it's all about green. Frankly, if you just replanted these planters with flowers and xeriscape and the storyline, there's a million things you can do. Feel free to use some paint. By the way, as a policy recommendation, I would condemn Trammell Crow's retail and take it from them. Because they're not going to play. They don't know how to play. I'm being facetious, but not real. You need the retail merchandising done under one group, one branded, and they can't do it. That's not what they do. They'd love to get rid of it, I'm sure. So that would be a policy decision that affects design.
We focused on retail. We looked at the area of what works, what doesn't work, and one of the questions you have to deal with of all these things is what works for the city, what works for the developer, what works for the landlord, what works for the shopper. There are a number of different constituencies that have to be dealt with here of what you're going to do. In our brief time together, and hearing some other good ideas from my colleagues, what works is the big box retailing down on Hamden and Walmart. From a retail point of view, they know what they're doing. They're where they need to be. They're located properly. They know who their shopper is. They're located out on the street that has, 70,000 cars or whatever it is going through a day. This is where they want to be. They're selling to their customer. They know how to get them in. The other things that work, frankly, from that point of view, are not retail. The residential seems to be working. The office seems to be working. The civic spaces, the civic building seems to be working with the library and the great facility you have here. That seems to be working. What doesn't seem to be working from a retail point of view is exactly what we just heard, is the little block in between the double-loaded space right there. It has 60,000 square feet of space, which is not much critical mass. It's probably a third the size of the Walmart store, I'll say just off the top of my head, and the amount of retail space out there, we were told, was 7,000 square feet. You cannot draw people from any distance with 7,000 square feet of retail space. You're dealing with a critical mass that is not critical, nor is it mass especially. And so what you end up having to decide for yourself is, if you're going to be a retail space, what is your shopper, what is your customer, what is your client, how do you go about doing that? The area around the circle should not be retail space. The idea of it being civic space is good. In fact, we thought, from our point of view, speaking as retail people, if some of that space were converted to residential space, I think you could probably do a pretty good job filling those spaces up. One of the other things that doesn't work is that it doesn't work as a transit-oriented retail facility. We're hearing that the various retail stations, the various light rail stations is what I meant to say, around the city, none of them have emerged as especially powerful retail places. It's people who are commuting back and forth. We know what we buy when we're on our way to work and when we're on our way home, and we know how we feel when we get off at the light rail station at 8 o'clock at night. We know what we want to do. Now, if you put something in there that's compelling that you'll want to come back to, well and good. But what kind of things would you ordinarily get on your way to work and on your way home? Those two waves of people, 22,000 riders I think we're dealing with. The word we hear is that, for instance, the coffee guy seems to be doing pretty good. That's not a terribly big surprise. Sells a lot of coffee in the morning, probably sells some things on the way home as well. We get into design a lot with retail, and you have to with retail because they're always concerned about co-tenancies, adjacencies, orientation, visibility. It's a very important part of this. And for instance, we even noticed that with the big box centers, none of them adjoin each other. They're all individual on their own pad sites, so that for a pedestrian, you have to cross a parking lot. You have to do some walking even to get from one store to the other. So the big box spaces are not helping this particular block. And the transit, in addition to the fact that there's some question whether or not transit shoppers transit passengers are very good shoppers to begin with, when they get off the train, they split up and go either to the right or to the left. They don't even make it to the retail block. You have a double-deck block on the south. You have the large block on the north. They split up and go either way, so they don't even get there. If you made up your mind, and I think there is money to be made from the transit workers in some measure, as long as we understand what they buy and what they don't, how do you get them through that block? And that is to put the parking to the east of it. We didn't measure all the distances, but how far is it to walk to the northernmost edge of that parking lot compared with how far it would be to walk over towards the Walmart store? If you need to have eyes on the street, as Jane Jenkins says, get them past these stores, you have to put them in a position where they're actually going to be in a position where they have to use it. So we have that transit orientation to deal with. The amount of retail space is a concern just because of how small it is. But the other thing is, if you do have destination spaces, and somebody mentioned restaurants, the idea of it being a festival space, the idea of turning that into programmable space, turning it into a place where people can gather, let Hamden continue with its 70,000 people, bring people into a programmable space. It's supposed to be the town center. It's supposed to be the place where people gather. We saw a presentation just before lunch today where they're talking about how people in their towns gather in particular spots that are fun to be in, where people naturally tend to gather. Where would that be in Englewood? Isn't there the possibility to do that here in a place that actually calls itself the town center? So as far as the retail is concerned, we're dealing with some spaces that are actually pretty successful in their own right. But from the point of view of the retail right there, it's a matter of who's your customer going to be? Is it going to be these 11,000 people in and out in the morning, or are you going to put together something that is more destination-oriented, that people come to at night in order to dine? I think there's an argument to be made in both cases, which we couldn't obviously settle in this amount of time. I think this place is ripe for an advisory services panel to come in and work on this. Looks like a lot of good could come out of that. One last thing we also thought from the point of view of the transit, though, is the buses. The buses ride down in that little gully over there. What do the people who get on off those buses see of the project at all? They hardly see anything. They're looking for the ramp. They're looking for the steps. Wouldn't it be possible to bring the buses into that loop and drop people off there, let them drive them through that street, let them see the plaza, walk across the bridge? The idea is to get the kind of exposure that retailers are looking for. Retailers like to be seen. They want to be in places where they can be seen. They want the visibility. If you can't get it from the point of view of the people who are driving by, your only alternative here is to get people who are walking by.
Recommendations for change and improvement. Fix front doors. Define major entryways at Inca Street 285 and the light rail station. Develop Inca as a boulevard. Infill Inca Street with 2 to 3 story buildings where currently there is parking. Add retail with residential uses above. Reface existing blank retail walls. Extend boulevard treatments south of 285. Embrace civic space. Enclose the piazza area on the southwest by extending Civic Center in that direction. Make more family-friendly by adding water, play equipment, and lovable art. Remove concrete and add grass. Convert retail on north side of Piazza to public or residential. Increase programming of space. Brand the area. Mark boundaries at cross streets on 285. Relocate north transit parking area to the east of the station, so transit riders must walk through the TOD. Use shared parking between Inca and Galapago for transit parking. Use south half of Walmart parking for structured parking with ground floor retail along Englewood Parkway. Convert existing north transit parking lot to higher density residential development. Infill big box areas with retail buildings connected to one another. Develop the portion of Englewood Parkway between Inca and Galapago as a food venue with restaurants and markets. Convert angle parking to parallel parking. Reclaim this public space for outdoor seating. Reconstruct storefronts. Replace shrubs with flowers and xeriscape. Add overhead lights. Program as an outdoor festival space. Consolidate retail space ownership. Develop and define pedestrian and bicycle routes. Provide missing sidewalk links.